The Origins of Money and the Development of the Modern Financial System by L. Randall Wray. Toward an Institutionalist Critique. The orthodox story, in which the present is a linear descendant of the past, relies critically on an approach identified as hypothetical logical in the passage of Samuelson above. The orthodox economist views our economy as a more or less free market economy in which only real variables matter, at least for the long run, and in which neutral money is used primarily to facilitate exchange of real goods undertaken by self-interested maximizers for personal gain. The origins of money are then discovered by abstracting from this hypothetical economy to an economy that is an exact replication, save one feature. It does not use money. The conventional economist then compares these two economies and finds that the one using money faces lower transaction costs. Money must therefore have been created to reduce the transactions costs that arise in barter. Historical detail can then be added to the picture. Mental gymnastics ensure that no historical fact conflicts with the basic neoclassical view of the world. Money can be discovered in almost any society, past or present, if one is willing to include as money tobacco, leather and hides, furs, olive oil, beer or spirits, slaves or wives, huge rocks and landmarks, and cigarette butts, as Samuelson is wont to do. If such objects cannot be found in a particular society, one can always argue that this society merely has not yet discovered money. All societies are based on exchange, or at least would be, if natural propensities were allowed to flower. Again, if one is willing to define almost any human interaction as an exchange, then exchange can be found in virtually any society. Finally, all such exchanges must be made on the basis of cold calculation of self-gain, for no other exchange could be rational. Institutionalists have mounted a several-pronged attack on this methodology and its conclusions. First, institutionalists have rejected the formalist methodology adapted by orthodox economists in favor of a substantive methodology. In the formalist methodology, the economist begins with the rational economic agent facing scarce resources and unlimited wants. The focus, then, must be on choice. Implicit or explicit relative prices will be generated by an auctioneer or through tantonement to guide choice as rational agents maximize. Footnote 4. C. Ingrao and Israel, 1990. In general, even under very strict assumptions, the formalized neoclassical economy is not likely to achieve a unique equilibrium as defined by a vector of relative prices. Even if equilibrium can be shown to exist, that equilibrium is not likely to be unique, nor can it be shown to be stable. Thus, even if an equilibrium price vector can be found, there is no assurance that the economy would tend toward it. End footnote. Since the formalist methodology abstracts from historical institutional detail, it must be applicable to all human societies. Indeed, it is presumably relevant for the study of any organism capable of making choices. Institutionalists instead argue that economics has to do with a study of the institutionalized interactions among humans and between humans and nature. Footnote 5. Indeed, many economic activities do not involve choice. For example, according to Dalton, in subsistence non-market economies, the question of choice among real alternatives does not arise in such explicit fashion. The Trobriander is born into a yam-growing economy. He does not choose to plant yams, no more than the American chooses to learn to speak English. End footnote. The economy is a component of culture, or more specifically, of the material life process of society. As such, substantivist economics cannot abstract from the institutions that help to shape economic processes, and the substantivist problem is not the formal one of choice, but one concerning production and distribution. Footnote 6. This discussion follows that of Stanfield, 1986. However, he defines substantive economics as the study of institutionalized interactions with nature. I think this is too narrow. We should also include the study of institutionalized interactions among humans. End footnote. The universalist formalistic method might be rejected because institutions matter, since these influence and indicate production and distribution arrangements adopted by society. If these vary across cultures or over time, this could indicate that different social approaches have been taken to questions of production and distribution. This dictates a comparative methodology. Comparative anthropology addresses differences across cultures, while comparative history deals with the evolution of institutional arrangements through time, including within and across societies. As Bloch argues, the comparative method should, quote, analyze and isolate the originality of different societies, end quote. He claims that if our analysis remains within the bounds of one society, we will never uncover the causes of germination of a historical development. A, quote, general phenomenon must have equally general causes, end quote. A series of monographs, each on a particular society, may be quite useful, but none of them, working separately, is able to provide the solution to a question concerning the general causes of a general phenomenon. Quote, on the other hand, monographs become important only because the comparative method can elicit from the chaotic multiplicity of circumstances those which were generally effective, the real causes, end quote. Use of the comparative method allows one to, quote, isolate the originality of different societies, end quote, by using factual studies which are detailed, critical, and well documented. The economist who wishes to use the comparative method faces a major hurdle. The economy in most, all, societies is embedded in the total social fabric so that it is difficult to identify. Footnote 7. Some might question whether economics can be applied to pre-capitalist societies, for it could be questioned whether these exhibit an economic system at all. I answered these questions affirmatively. As Dalton argues, quote, it is useful to regard all communities or societies as having economic systems. The word system refers to structured arrangements and rules which assure that material goods and specialist services are provided in a repetitive fashion, end quote. However, one should not fall into the universalist trap of formalist economics, which seeks to define all human behavior as the result of constrained choice. Arguing that all societies exhibit an economic system does not imply that all have the same structured arrangements and rules of provisioning. End footnote. This is the corollary to the institutionalist rejection of the formalist method. One cannot abstract from the institutions which shape and are shaped by society's way of making a living. This is particularly true of pre-capitalist societies, where productive activities are closely integrated with other social activities. Polanyi argued that in pre-capitalist societies, the embedded economy is shaped by the rules and norms of the society, even where self-interested behavior exists. It must be non-economic, because the community generally takes care of all its members, and norms of behavior exert continual pressure to eliminate self-interest as a cause of economic behavior. While this is an effective critique of orthodoxy's homogeneous globules of desire, it also means that economic phenomena are difficult to disentangle from other, more general, pre-capitalist social behavior. However, this does not mean that the comparative economist's task is impossible. In capitalist society, economic behavior achieves its highest degree of liberation from other social activities. The economy of capitalist society is the least embedded. Footnote 8. According to Polanyi and Stanfield, it is only where productive activities are divorced from other social activities that we can identify the economy as a separate entity. Where this occurs, we can observe the laws of supply and demand operating in a self-regulating market economy. As I will discuss in more detail below, I think this goes too far. While the self-regulating market economy is surely the normative ideal of neoclassical economics, it has never been achieved. Supply and demand have never operated separately from other social forces. That is, even under capitalism, the economy can never be observed as functioning separately from society. However, I agree that in principle, it is easier to identify a logic of the capitalist economic system that operates more independently from human intentions than does the logic of other economic systems. It has been commonly noted that economic theory really did not exist before capitalism. As capitalism develops, the economy becomes sufficiently separate from the larger social setting that an economics discipline is created. See Polanyi, 1971. End footnote. If one can develop an understanding of economic phenomena of a capitalist economy, one may use the comparative method to develop an understanding of pre-capitalist economies and improve one's understanding of the capitalist economy. This is because, as Stanfield argues, the facts of the capitalist economy were already embedded in non-economic social relations of pre-capitalist societies. These phenomena become more obvious in capitalist society. Once we understand their functioning within a capitalist economy, we may contrast this with the role they play in pre-capitalist economies. A powerful critique of the orthodox story regarding money can be developed using the findings of comparative anthropology, comparative history, and comparative economics. Institutionalists have already used the first and second methods extensively and successfully, but use of a third prong has not been extensively explored. This is not so much the fault of those who have adopted the comparative approach, as it is the result of economists' inadequate theoretical understanding of the role of money in a capitalist economy. Given the embedded nature of economic phenomenon in prior societies, an understanding of what money is and what it does in capitalist societies is essential to this approach. This can then be contrasted with the functioning of pre-capitalist societies in order to allow identification of which types of pre-capitalist societies we would use money and what money would be used for in these societies. This understanding is essential for informed speculation on the origins of money. Finally, the methodology used here must be carefully distinguished from the orthodox approach, as typified by the quote from Samuelson above. The neoclassical economist creates an abstract, formal economy that is purported to represent the actual economy. An identical economy is then hypothesized that does not use money. These are then compared to discover why money was invented. In contrast, the comparative approach presented here begins with an understanding of the role money plays in capitalist economies, which shares essential features with analyses developed by a wide range of institutionalists and post-Keynesian macroeconomists. Footnote 9. See Chick, 1986, Moore, 1988, Niggle, 1990, and Wray, 1990, for such treatments. I then use this understanding, end footnote. I then use this understanding and the understanding developed by comparative anthropology and comparative history of pre-capitalist societies in order to logically reconstruct the origins of money. Footnote 10. Admittedly, this is a difficult and controversial task. Two factors make the task difficult. As I will argue below, money was almost certainly invented before writing. Thus, we will not find its origins in the historical record. Furthermore, I believe the historical record as interpreted by comparative historians generally suffers from an incomplete understanding of the nature of money. Comparative anthropologists are closer to the mark, as I will argue. This means that I must reconstruct history using comparative economics. Thus, what follows is necessarily a speculative first attempt at discovering the origins of money, and at reconstructing the development of the modern financial system. Those who have written the monographs studying particular economies can help in further attempts at this reconstruction by filling in the details. This paper must isolate only those most important variables required to present a concise picture. The world is obviously much more complex. End footnote. Before proceeding, however, money should be defined. In this approach, money cannot be identified by its peculiar personal physical characteristics, malleable, durable, transportable, nor by its functions, transactions medium, means of payment, etc. Rather, money is defined with respect to the operation of the economy as a whole. Money is identified as a unit of account. It becomes the social measure of value in all monetary economies. A monetary economy is one for which assets exist whose liquidity premia exceed carrying costs. Those assets that function as money must carry a liquidity premium that exceeds carrying costs. Footnote 11. I will distinguish money from those assets that fulfill functions of money in a moment. End footnote. These assets may have peculiar physical characteristics, or they may not. They will have essential properties which determine their liquidity. In a monetary economy, the purpose of production is to obtain money-denominated assets. This can be contrasted with a barter economy, or a real wage economy, or a cooperative economy. These are merely different names for non-monetary economies, in which the object of production is real, physical output. It is necessary to distinguish between money and those assets denominated in the money of account. Thus, bank deposits are not money, but are denominated in the social unit of account, that is, money, the dollar in the U.S. Similarly, it is necessary to distinguish between money and those various functions performed by assets denominated in the unit of account. Money is not what money does. Some money-denominated assets function as media of exchange or means of payment. While these functions are typically fulfilled by certain money-denominated assets, this does not make any particular asset that so functions money. Much of the confusion over whether primitive economies use money results because those who study such societies merely look to see whether these might have any objects which perform some of the functions we associate with modern money. Once money is clearly separated from some of its functions it performs in modern monetary economies, it becomes apparent that primitive monies are not money. The rest of this paper seeks to identify the origins of money and the development of the modern financial system on the basis of these views of money in the modern economy. and of the analyses of comparative anthropology and comparative history of pre-capitalist societies.